The night nurse had walked past the boy 3 times. The first time, she thought he was just waiting for a relative to come out of surgery. The second time, she noticed the duct-taped boots and the scrap of cardboard under his feet to keep the cold from seeping in. The third time, she slowed down. The boy hadn't moved, still sitting on the same worn bench just outside St. John's Hospital in South Haven. His head bowed over a thick sketchbook resting on his knees, hands smudged with graphite and broken bits of crayon. No backpack, no parent nearby, nothing to show he belonged to anyone. Just a quiet little figure, small, still, and strangely steady. His name was Eli, 9 years old, slender, eyes too deep for his age. Every afternoon after school, he came here, sat in the same spot under the shadow of the old maple tree, not to beg, not to talk, just to draw. Over time, staff and visitors got used to him. He became a part of the landscape, like the statue by the fountain or the birds nesting near the roof, until the day everything shifted. A man in a dark grey suit came rushing across the courtyard, holding a little girl in his arms. The girl was limp, her arms resting lifelessly by her side, legs wrapped in a knitted blanket. Her eyes were open, quietly staring at the sky. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Eli stood up. He didn't say "excuse me." He didn't hesitate. He simply stepped forward, gently touched the edge of the girl's blanket, and looked up at the man. "Sir," he said softly, "I can help her walk again." The man froze. In a place where silence often lingered between grief and hope, Eli's voice landed like a stone dropped in still water, too calm, too certain, not the kind of thing a child should say, unless he meant it. The man studied the boy, from the battered shoes to the worn coat to the unwavering eyes. "Who are you?" he asked. "I'm Eli," the boy replied, his gaze returning to the girl, "and I know how to help the body remember." The man narrowed his eyes. "You even know what's wrong with her?" Eli paused. Then he spoke slowly, like repeating something he'd learned by heart. "The body doesn't forget. It just closes itself off when it's afraid. You don't fix it by force. You help it feel safe again." The man's arms tightened around the girl. "Where'd you learn that?" "My mom taught me, before she passed." Eli opened his sketchbook. Not just pictures. There were scribbles, little diagrams of joints and limbs, pressure points marked in crayon, clumsy handwriting that read, "Warm first, gentle contact, never rush, always talk." The man let out a quiet laugh, more disbelief than amusement. "You think this can heal paralysis?" "It's not about healing," Eli said softly. "It's about reminding her what it felt like to stand. To believe she still can. Sometimes the body just needs someone to believe with it." The man didn't answer. He turned, walked toward the glass doors, and disappeared into the hospital. But as they slid shut behind him, he glanced back, just once, and saw the boy still standing there, sketchbook in hand, watching quietly. For reasons he couldn't explain, the man couldn't shake the look in that boy's eyes. And for the first time in a long while, something stirred in him. Not hope, exactly, but something that felt like it might grow into it. Jonathan Reeves tried to forget. He told himself the kid was just strange. Maybe lost, maybe dreaming too big. Either way, he had no business walking up to strangers with paralyzed children, offering hope like it was something you could pull out of a backpack. But that night, while Issa slept next to him in her hospital bed, he found himself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the boy with the taped-up boots. He tried to brush it off, then the next day, again, and the day after that. Still that quiet voice kept echoing. "I can help her walk again." By Friday, Jonathan had enough. He went back. He didn't even know why. Maybe to prove a point. Maybe just to shut the memory up. But when he stepped into the courtyard, Eli was there, same spot, same coat, same sketchbook on his lap. This time, Jonathan walked straight over. "You said you could help her," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. Eli looked up, calm as ever. "Yes, sir." "Explain it to me. This remembering thing you talked about, what does it mean?" Eli set his sketchbook aside as if he'd been waiting for this question. "My mum used to say the body doesn't forget how to move. It just stops trusting itself. Especially when it's hurt for too long, what we do is help it feel safe again, little by little." Jonathan crossed his arms. "You're not a doctor." "No, sir, I'm just her age," Eli said with a small smile. "And I've seen things work when people believe they can." Jonathan hesitated. "You really think a few drawings and kind words can fix spinal damage?" Eli didn't flinch. "No, sir, but I think the right kind of touch, and warmth, and being talked to like she still matters might wake something up in her. Jonathan sighed. And what do you want for this? Money? Attention? No, sir, Eli said gently. Just 1 hour. If nothing happens, you'll never have to come back. Jonathan studied him again. There was no arrogance in Eli's voice, no big promises, just a quiet boy who had somehow learned more about grace than most grown-ups ever would. He didn't know what made him say yes. Maybe it was the way Eli never begged, just offered. Maybe it was how Isa hadn't smiled in over a year. And this kid was the first person who even tried. Fine, Jonathan said. Tomorrow, 1 hour, Harrington Park, 10 o'clock. Eli nodded. We'll need a rice sock, a tennis ball, and a blanket. A rice sock? Jonathan raised an eyebrow. To warm her feet, Eli said simply. It helps her remember what comfort feels like. Jonathan blinked. It was such a small answer. And yet, it made more sense than anything he'd heard in that hospital. He didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked away. But even as he left, a strange thought slipped quietly into his mind. What if the boy is right? Saturday morning came grey and quiet. Jonathan pulled up to Harrington Park with Isa bundled in the back seat, wrapped in her favourite blue blanket. She looked at him with tired eyes. Are we going to another doctor? She asked softly. No, sweetheart, he said. Someone wants to meet you. When they got there, Eli was already waiting. He had set out a folded blanket on the grass near a tree. Next to it were a small cloth bag filled with warm rice, a tennis ball, and a pair of thick socks that didn't match. Jonathan carried Isa over. She said nothing, just kept staring at the boy who smiled like he'd known her for years. Hi, Isa, Eli said gently. I'm Eli. You don't have to do anything today. Just sit and let your feet feel the sun. Isa glanced at her dad. He gave her a small nod. She let Eli slide the socks onto her feet. They're warm, she whispered. Yeah, Eli grinned. That's on purpose. He placed the rice sock across her ankles, careful and slow, like he was tucking in something fragile. Your legs are part of you, he said. Even if they've been quiet, they're still listening. Isa tilted her head. Listening to what? To kindness, Eli replied, and to memories. Jonathan stood a few feet back, watching. Something about the boy's calmness. It made even the air feel softer. Eli rolled the tennis ball across Isa's soles slowly with both hands. Tell me what you feel. Isa was quiet. Pressure, she said finally. Kinda ticklish. That's good, Eli nodded. That means your nerves are waking up. She looked down at her legs. But I still can't move them. You don't have to yet, Eli said. The first step isn't moving, it's feeling. He went on talking to her, not like a patient, not like someone broken, but like a friend who believed in her more than she believed in herself. They laughed once, just once, when Eli dropped the rice sock and scrambled to catch it. Jonathan looked away, trying to hide the smile tugging at his face. An hour passed. No miracle happened, no legs were lifted, but something small, almost invisible, changed. Isa talked. She asked questions. She smiled. When it was time to leave, Jonathan lifted her gently and turned to Eli. Do you want money? He asked, voice low. Eli shook his head. No, sir. Then why are you doing this? Eli looked down at the spot where Isa had been sitting. Then he looked back at Jonathan and said quietly, Because she smiled, that's enough for today. Jonathan didn't say anything, just stood there, unsure of what to feel. But as he walked back to the car with his daughter in his arms, he realised something. The boy hadn't just reached Isa, he'd reached him too. The next morning, Isa asked her father something he hadn't heard in a long time. Can we go back to the park? Jonathan looked up from his coffee, surprised. You want to see Eli again? She nodded. He makes my legs feel like they're still there. Jonathan didn't question it, didn't try to explain it away. He just nodded and said, All right, let's go. That Sunday morning they returned. Eli was already there, waiting in the same spot with the same quiet patience. This time he had added a small portable speaker playing soft piano music. Nothing fancy, just calm, steady notes that drifted into the air like a lullaby. Isa settled onto the blanket without hesitation. Eli began again, warm rice sock, gentle pressure, slow movements across her feet and toes. But this time he talked more. He told her stories about how his mum used to teach older folks how to move again after surgery, how she'd make them laugh even when they were in pain, how she believed that healing didn't start with medicine, it started with being seen. You know, Eli said, rolling the tennis ball under her heel, my mum used to say the body is like a crowded room. Isa blinked. What do you mean? When it's hurt, it gets loud inside. Fear, sadness, frustration, they take up all the space. And the part that wants to heal can't get through. So we make a little space, quiet things down, until the healing part can speak again. Isa stared at him for a moment, then looked down at her legs. What if it never speaks? Eli paused, thoughtful, then said, Then we just keep showing up, every day, like a knock at the door, gentle, patient. One day, it opens. Jonathan stood nearby, arms crossed, pretending not to listen, but he heard every word. At one point, Isa said softly, My toes feel warm. Eli smiled. That's your body remembering. It's not magic, it's you. Jonathan felt something stir in his chest. Hope. Not the loud kind, not the kind that breaks down doors. Just a quiet, steady kind. The kind you don't notice until it's been sitting beside you a while. When the session ended, Eli began packing up his things. Jonathan cleared his throat. You eat lunch yet? Eli looked up, surprised. No, sir. Jonathan handed him a paper bag. Turkey sandwich, no mustard. Eli took it gently, nodded once. Thank you. They didn't say more than that. But that small gesture, simple and silent, was the first sign of something shifting. Not just in Isa, but in Jonathan too. Something was softening. The next Sunday, Isa was already awake before sunrise. Jonathan walked past her room and paused when he saw her sitting up in bed, holding one of the mismatched socks Eli had given her. She looked up. Do you think he'll bring the music again? Jonathan smiled. If you ask, I bet he will. She hugged the sock to her chest. I like how quiet it is when he's around. Like my body listens better. At the park, Eli was waiting. Same spot, same soft music playing from the speaker. He greeted Isa with a warm smile and helped her settle onto the blanket. Today something felt different. There was more light in her eyes, more curiosity, more trust. As Eli gently massaged her feet, he talked about clouds, about how sometimes they covered the sky for days, but the sun never actually left. It was always there, just waiting. Isa listened quietly. Then, halfway through the session, her face changed. A flicker of surprise. She looked down at her foot. Wait. Eli paused. What is it? I felt something, like pressure, right here. She pointed to her toes. Eli leaned in, gently placed his hands there again. Try to think about them. Not like moving them, just saying hello. Isa closed her eyes, focused. A moment passed. Then her big toe twitched. It was small, almost nothing. But it was real. Jonathan saw it too. His eyes widened. He took a step forward, breath caught in his throat. Did that just... he whispered. Eli didn't react with shock or excitement, just a quiet, steady smile. That's her body knocking back, he said. Isa looked up. I did that? Yes, Eli nodded. That was all you. She started crying, soft, overwhelmed tears that rolled down her cheeks without sound. I thought my body hated me, she said through a shaky voice. Eli shook his head. No, it was just scared, but today it trusted you again. Jonathan knelt beside his daughter, brushing her hair back, trying to find words. But all he managed was a whisper. I'm proud of you. That afternoon, as they packed up, Eli handed Isa a tiny notebook. What's this? She asked. It's for recording the things you feel, he said. Even the small stuff matters. It helps you see how far you're really going. She nodded, hugging the notebook to her chest like it was made of gold. Jonathan didn't say much, but as he walked back to the car, he kept looking at his daughter, and then at the boy following behind with the sketchbook under his arm. For the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel afraid of hope anymore. The next weekend, Isa didn't smile when they pulled up to the park. She didn't ask about the music, she didn't look for Eli, she just sat in the car, arms crossed, eyes staring out the window. Jonathan leaned in. Sweetheart, you okay? She shook her head. What if it doesn't happen again? What do you mean? My toe moved last time. But what if it was a mistake? What if it never happens again? Jonathan paused, unsure how to answer. Eli approached the car, carrying his small bag of supplies. When he saw Isa's face, he didn't say anything right away. Just opened the door gently and sat on the curb beside her. It's okay to be mad, he said softly. Isa glanced at him. I'm not mad. It's okay if you are, he replied. Some days feel like the mountain just got taller. She stayed quiet, picking at the edge of her blanket. I wanted to move my whole leg this time, she whispered. I thought maybe I could, but now I don't even feel my toes again. Eli nodded slowly. That happens. Healing isn't a straight line, it's more like waves. Some come strong, some barely touch the shore. Isa looked at him. But it hurts. I know, Eli said, and it's still part of the work. He reached into his bag and pulled out a smooth pebble, placing it in her hand. My mum used to call this a keep-going stone. When one of her patients had a hard day, she'd give them something small to hold. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded them that the hard days matter too. Isa stared at the stone in her palm. It was warm from Eli's pocket. Even days when I feel nothing? Especially those, he said. They sat quietly for a while. Then slowly Isa turned and nodded. I'm ready, she said. On the blanket, she lay back as Eli gently worked her legs. No big movement today, no sudden breakthrough, but her breathing steadied, her shoulders relaxed, and near the end she whispered something that made Jonathan's throat tighten. Thank you for coming back even when I didn't want to. Eli smiled. That's what healing friends do, they show up anyway. Later that evening, Jonathan tucked Isa into bed and sat with her as she drew in the little notebook Eli had given her. Under today's date, she wrote, I didn't feel my legs today, but I felt loved. That counts too. The following Sunday, the sun came out early. It was one of those soft spring mornings where everything feels a little lighter, a little more possible. Eli was already at the park when they arrived. His usual setup was ready. Blanket, socks, the rice pack, and now a new addition, a tiny wind chime hanging from the tree above. It makes a nice sound when the wind is kind, he said when Isa noticed it. She smiled. I like that, when the wind is kind. This time there was no hesitation. She got on the blanket without help and placed the notebook beside her. Eli knelt down, warming her feet gently. How are you feeling today? He asked. Isa looked up at the sky. Hopeful, I think. Eli nodded. That's a good word. They started like always. Warmth, light pressure, the tennis ball. Isa focused, breathing slow and steady, her hands resting on her chest. Eli placed his fingers just above her ankle. Tell your foot in your mind to try. Isa closed her eyes. Minutes passed, nothing moved. Then her foot shifted. Not a twitch, a full, small lift off the blanket, just an inch, but clearly fully real. Jonathan gasped. Isa's eyes flew open. Did you see that? Eli grinned, not loud or surprised, just full of quiet joy. I did. Jonathan stepped forward, hands trembling. You moved your foot, Isa. You actually moved it. I didn't think I could, she whispered. Eli spoke softly. That's the thing about belief. It often shows up right after you think it's gone. Isa laughed, a sound so pure it made Jonathan's eyes water. He knelt beside her, holding her hand, unable to say much. Eli just sat back, letting the moment bloom without rushing it. After a while, Isa looked at him and asked, What now? Eli tilted his head. Now, we celebrate. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a small drawing he'd made of her, smiling, sitting under the tree with her notebook. It's for your wall, he said, so you don't forget how far you've come. Isa took it with both hands. You're like my brother and my coach all in one. Eli chuckled. I'll take that. Jonathan, still quiet, finally spoke. I was wrong about you, he said. I thought you were just a kid with a strange idea. Eli looked at him. Sometimes that's exactly what healing needs. A strange idea and someone who believes in it. They packed up in silence, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of something gentle and powerful. Progress. A week later, Eli didn't show up at the park. Jonathan and Isa waited on the usual blanket, but the boy never came. Isa kept looking toward the sidewalk. Maybe he forgot. Jonathan shook his head. That doesn't seem like him. He drove them home, but a quiet worry settled in his chest. The next morning, he asked one of the nurses at St. John's if she'd ever seen a boy sitting outside with a sketchbook. She nodded right away. He used to wait by the front entrance most evenings. I think he lived nearby, alone, maybe with an older relative. He doesn't say much. That night, Jonathan drove through the neighbourhood around the hospital until he spotted him, sitting on a porch with chipped paint, sketching by flashlight. Jonathan pulled over. Eli looked up, surprised. Is Isa okay? He asked immediately. She's fine, Jonathan said. We were waiting for you yesterday. Eli looked down. I didn't have a ride. Jonathan nodded slowly. Why didn't you say something? I didn't want to bother you. There was a pause. Then Jonathan said, Get your things, I'll take you home. Eli blinked. Home? Our home? Eli stared at him, confused. You mean to visit? No, I mean to live, Jonathan said gently. You've given us something we can't repay, and I don't want you sitting out here alone anymore. Eli looked down at his sketchbook, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, Jonathan said. So Eli packed up his few belongings, a backpack, a blanket, and a box of pencils, and stepped into their car like someone walking into a dream they weren't sure they deserved. When they got to the house, Isa was at the window. She gasped and ran to the door. You're here! Eli smiled, a little shy. Yeah, I guess I live here now. She grabbed his hand and pulled him inside. Come see the wall. I put up your drawing. From that night on, the house began to change. There was laughter again, There were warm meals, late-night card games, and mornings that started with sleepy smiles instead of silence. Eli helped Issa with her daily stretches, and Jonathan started joining them. At first, just watching, then assisting, then laughing with them both like he hadn't in years. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Issa said something that made them all pause. You know, before Eli, everything felt like it was ending, but now it feels like something's starting. Jonathan reached over and gently held her hand. It is, he said. It really is. It had been 3 months since that first day in the park. Every morning, the sun came through the window just right, warming the living room floor where Eli and Issa did their sessions. The blanket was always laid out, the socks were always warmed. And Issa, now more confident, often led the routine herself. Jonathan watched them from the kitchen most days, holding his coffee like it was the only thing keeping him steady. One Tuesday morning it happened. They were doing gentle stretches, nothing too different. Eli had just finished rolling the tennis ball beneath her feet when he said, "Okay, now just think about your knees. No pressure, just think." Issa leaned back, closed her eyes and focused. Her face was calm, but her fingers curled slightly, like her body was reaching for something unseen. Then, slowly, softly, her knees lifted off the blanket. Both of them. Not high, just an inch, but high enough to make Eli freeze. Issa opened her eyes. "Did they?" Eli nodded, eyes wide, voice caught in his throat. "Yeah, they moved." Jonathan dropped his coffee. It shattered on the floor, but he didn't even look at it. He rushed over, fell to his knees beside Issa and just stared. "You did that," he whispered. "I don't know how," Issa said, breathing hard, tears welling up. "I just kept thinking about standing." Jonathan didn't speak. He just pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. Eli stayed a few feet away, smiling quietly. That's how he always celebrated, quietly. Later that night they had ice cream for dinner. Issa laughed so hard she snorted. Jonathan told a terrible joke that made Eli nearly spit out his spoonful. The house was full of light. Before bedtime, Jonathan stepped into Eli's room, the guest room that had slowly become his own. He sat at the edge of the bed. "You know," Jonathan said, "for a long time, I thought being strong meant carrying everything by myself." Eli looked up from his sketchbook. "But now," Jonathan continued, "I see real strength looks a lot like a quiet boy who refuses to give up on someone, even when the world already has." Eli looked down, smiling. "That's what my mum used to say too." "What did she say exactly?" "That healing doesn't shout, it whispers. And the people who hear it, they're the ones willing to sit in the silence long enough." Jonathan nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "Thank you," he said. Eli closed his sketchbook, his voice low but sure. "She's the one doing the real work. I'm just here so she never has to feel alone." It happened on a Sunday. The sun was warm, the grass was dry, birds were singing, like they somehow knew the day was special. They were back at Harrington Park, just like where it all began. Issa sat on the blanket, dressed in her favourite yellow hoodie. Her hair was tied back, her eyes were focused. Eli was kneeling in front of her, checking her feet, adjusting her socks. Jonathan stood nearby, hands tucked into his pockets, trying not to look nervous. "Today feels different," Issa said. Eli nodded. "It does." They had been building to this moment for weeks. The toe twitch, the foot lift, the knees, everything leading up to one question. Was she ready to stand? Eli held out both hands. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "We can wait." Issa shook her head. "No, I want to try." Jonathan stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Issa gripped Eli's hands. Her face tightened, not with pain, but with effort. And then slowly, carefully, she stood. Her legs shook, her knees wobbled, but she stood. On her own. Eli's eyes were wide, filled with disbelief and joy. Jonathan fell to his knees, hands covering his face, tears spilling out. Issa laughed. A full, radiant laugh. "I'm doing it," she cried. "I'm really doing it." Eli was speechless. She looked down at him. "Are you crying?" "No," he said, wiping his face quickly. "Just allergic to miracles." Jonathan hugged his daughter, holding her like the world might crack open from joy. And then Issa looked at Eli and said something he'd never forget. "You didn't just help me walk, you reminded me I'm still here." That afternoon they didn't go home right away. They stayed in the park. People gathered slowly, neighbours, nurses, old patients who had heard the story. Someone brought flowers, someone else brought cookies, no one shouted, no one made it a show. It was just people. People witnessing something good. Issa took 3 more steps that day, into her father's arms, into the arms of a life that no longer felt out of reach. As the sun began to set, Jonathan placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "My daughter walked today," he said softly, "because of you." Eli looked up at him, voice quiet as ever. "No, sir, she walked because she never stopped trying." He paused, looking at the tree above them, where the little wind chimes swayed in the breeze. "That's what my mum would have done," he added, and in that moment the whole world felt still. Not because something loud had happened, but because something true had. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. To be honest, it quietly moved me. Not in a dramatic way, but in the kind that lingers, like a soft echo in the heart. Eli's quiet kindness, Issa's small but steady courage, and the way healing happened, not through big moments but through patience and care, reminded me how powerful simple things can be. This story made me pause. It made me appreciate the quiet people in our lives, the ones who stay close when we're struggling and help us remember what we're still capable of. If it touched you too, even just a little, I'm really glad. Thank you again for watching. If you'd like to hear more gentle, meaningful stories like this, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And I hope to see you again in the next video, right here on Rain Inside.